Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. As you can hear from my voice, I'm not normally this deep of a voice. I like to be closer to the falsetto side of things, but that's just how it is. And just to make sure everybody's safe, I'm going to stay home tonight. And Amir Hashem will be back on Shabbos. We'll see how things are going. We're starting on the bottom of Daf Yomi at the very last word at a new Mishnah. This is a bunch of famous Gemaras that we hear all the time, and a lot of them are right here on this blot. We're going to be learning all of Chafei and Chavav Amud Aleph as well toward the bottom of the page, until about 3 lines from the bottom of the page. Let's get started. Ha'omer Yivarachucha Tovim. If someone says that the good people should bless, Harezu Derech Minus. What is this talking about? First Rashi on the page. Ibrahim Aschil. Yivarachucha Tovim Harezu Derech Minus. Rashi says She'eno Kolel Rishoyim B'Shivcho Shel Makom. That a person says only the tzaddikim are the ones who are worthy of giving bracha, but not the Rishoyim. And clearly, Hashkafa Satorah, that's not correct. Next. It's inappropriate to say that by the mitzvah of Shilach HaKan, that when we send away the mother bird, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a Bal Rachamim. We'll see why in the Gemara. The Mishnah continues that as well, that for the goodness that you are remembered. That's not appropriate either. And if one says modim, they say modim twice in davening, then mishaskin also, we quiet that person down. That's not appropriate. People who mistranslate the psukim about arayos and think that it's a homily or a euphemism of some kind, saying not so much that the Isser is by Tash B'Shamita with these particular people, but rather that it's about the covet of my father, as we'll see in the Gemara. That's also not correct. In all of these cases, Mishaskin, so we quiet them down. Ha'omer, one who mistranslates the pasuk of Mizarcha lo sitin laha'avir l'molech, that from your children you're not allowed to give them over to Molech, which we know is a form of Avodah Zarah, and they translate it as Lo sitem le'iabra be'armi yusa, that one should not impregnate a non-Jewish woman. Mishaskenaso benazifa. This is not just make him quiet. This is make him quiet benazifa with a much stronger version of Mishaskenaso. And if you look at Rashi, about a third of the way down on the page, Rashi says Dibur Hamaskal Mishaskenaso benazifa she'oker hakasav mimashmo. Shehu avodas chok la'amorim la'avir b'neim la'esh b'nosein karis lavo al goyav mechayev chatas ala shogeg. It's not correct. You're mixing up punishments. One has to do with avodah zarah, the other has to do with tash b'shemita with a goy. It's not the same sugya. You can't learn the pasuk the wrong way. So the Gemara opens 8 lines down on Chafei Amud Aleph and says, Bishlama, I understand the case of modim, that in the case of modim, so then the Gemara says, the mechse kishtei rishuyos. I'm thinking this one, and Rahman al-Islan, I'm thinking that one. It sounds like there's two different deities. That's not right. I also understand about Tovi Zacher Shimcha Nami. I understand that case too, that if you say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who does all the good stuff, the mashma, that implies al tov in ve'al ralo, that Hashem is good for the good stuff, but he's not so good for the bad stuff. That's an incorrect hashkafa. As we know, Vitnan, the Mishnah writes in Maseches Brachos, that one is obligated to say a blessing on bad things, just like the good things, because there is no bad. So if you say that Hashem is so great when he does good things, that's a little minus, that's kfiradik, that's not right. So we understand all of that. Ella, what does it mean when it says al kansipur yagiu rachamecha? Why is it that it's inappropriate to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed some rachamim, that when one takes the chicks away, takes the eggs away, that the mother bird has to be shooed away? That sounds like rachamim for the mother. So the Gemara says, my time on. And the Gemara responds with a machlokas. In Eretz Yisrael, there was a machlokas, Rabbi Yossi bar Avin and Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida. What was their machlokas about the case of al kansipur yagiu rachamecha? Why was it inappropriate? One, the concern was generating jealousy among the animals. What is that talking about? So Rashi says just about halfway down, almost exactly, maybe a line or two below the halfway mark, to Ramaskal Matalkina Lomar al ha'ofos chas al behemos v'chayos enochas. He's only sensitive about the ophos, about the birds, about the fowl, but not about the behemoths. That can't be. So that's one concern. And another sheet to hold. This is a very important idea in Hashkafa. Sometimes we think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a merachim, and it does have that look, but really that's not what it is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu functions in the form of a gzera. This is the way that things have to be, and it's going to be done this way. Sometimes it appears to be rachamim, But that's what the Gemara is saying here, is that he's concerned that if people look at the case of the Khan Sipor and they say, wow, Hashem is such a merachim, then you've misunderstood the quote unquote mechanics of how Hashem runs the world. It's not run birachamim, it's run bigzera, that whatever is right is done. So that's what these are the two concerns that we have here about this. Says the Gemara, a third of the way down the story. There was someone who was in front of Rabbi Omar, and he was saying as follows: when he was the chaz, and he said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, "You showed mercy on a bird, so please, you should also show mercy on us." Skip the parentheses. Omar Rabba snaps at him, or it doesn't seem that way at least. Kama yoda hai merabon on the ratzuya lemore. Wow, you're amazing. You really know how to twist God's arm. You know how to get in with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Abaye, what are you talking about? Abaye was 4th century. He was a Talmud of Rabbah. So Abaye was the Talmud, and he says to his Rebbe, I don't understand. You just praised this guy for saying that Al Kan Sipor Yagiu Rachamecha, but the Mishnah right here says you're not allowed to do that. We said that we're supposed to quiet this person down. So it says the Gemara, you're absolutely right, my dear Talmud, Abaye. He was just trying to sharpen and make sure he was on his game. But in fact, it's true that it's not appropriate to say that Al Kan Sipor Yagiu Rachamecha. Next story. There was someone who was davening in front of Rabbi Chanina, and he was doing Chazar Sashat. And when he was doing Chazar Sashat, he added in a bunch of words of his own. We're halfway down, 5 lines before the wide lines of Ham and Base. Omar, he says, Hakel, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Anora, and then he adds in a whole bunch of other words. Ha'adir, V'Hachazak, V'Ha'amitz. So the Rebbe says to him, Omar Le, with a little bite, he says, Omar Le, Siyamtinu l'shvach edamarach. Are you done praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu yet? Have you finished? Are you done yet? Why? Hashtanami Tlasa, the 3 that we say, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vanor, the 3 praises that we say, Ilav de Kasvinu Moshe be'oraisa, if not for the fact that those 3 words were found in the Psukim and the Torah. The Asu Knesses Hagdola v'Takninu, and the Anshe Knesses Hagdola who were Nevi'im, they wove it into the Shmona Esrei. If not for them, Onan Lo Amrinan, we never would have given these adjectives to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You added more, a chutzpah. You think you're praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's not right. Mashallah Adam Shaylo Elef Alfe Alafim Dinar Zahab. Just imagine a person who was a billionaire, just had so much money, endless gold. So what were they praising him with? Oh, look, I see dinari kesef. You have a silver coin in your house. Wow, you're such a balabas. You're such a gvir. So you're praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu with things that make no sense at all. With our little feeble minds, we think we can understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's inappropriate to overpraise Hashem. We learned this in a previous blot as well. Lo gnai hu lo. After a while, it just gets insulting. He's like, oh, I found a couple of pennies in the couch. You're rich. Come on, that's not even nice. 3 lines into the wide lines, the Gemara interjects something that doesn't really belong here. The reason it's placed here is because it's the author of the previous Maimer as well, which is Rabbi Chanina. Probably one of the most well-known Gemaras in Maseches Megillah. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Hakol bidei shamayim, chutz miyiras shamayim. Kodesh Baruch Hu governs everything, except that he's given the capacity for a human being to have yiras shamayim. So says the Gemara, how do we know this is true? And the pasuk says, what else? What does the Kodesh Baruch Hu ask from the Jews except to fear him? And the language of ki'im liyira michlal, it implies, oh, I just need you to fear me. No big deal. We work our whole lives to learn how to do yiras shamayim. So the Gemara says that michlal liyira milsa zutrasahi. Are you trying to tell me that this is a small deal? It's not a small deal to have yira. Says the Gemara, you're right. For the Hamona, for all of us, it's a pretty big deal to have real yiras shamayim. We can't see, touch, or feel God. Maybe sometimes we can feel God, but He has no physical attributes. We believe we utilize anthropomorphism to understand God to start with, and we're supposed to be on these graisa levels of yira. That's very hard. So says the Gemara, in one way, yiras shamayim is easy. When is that? When you're Moshe Rabbeinu. Legabe Moshe Rabbeinu, milsa zutrasihi. That is considered a small deal for him. For him to be able to have yiras shamayim is really no big deal. But for the rest of us, of course, it's quite challenging. Mashal, and here's a mashal that really does help to encapsulate how yiras shamayim works. Mashal adam shemavakshin heimenu kli gadol v'yeshlo. You go to someone and you say to them, I need to borrow a bookcase from you, a very, very large bookcase, and you have 10 of them just sitting around. So I asked for a kli gadol v'yeshlo, and he has it. So therefore, how does it feel to me? Domei alav kikli katan. If I have what you want, you need a bag of potatoes. If I've got 3 bags of potatoes, sure, b'simcha rabba, no problem. It's like a davar katan to me, even though you asked for a lot. However, katan ve'enlo, if you ask for something what seems to be small, what should be small, and you don't have it, so then dome alav kikli gadol. We are, of course, the latter version of this mashal, which is that a Kadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah says ki'im, that Yirah Shamayim should be simple. If we recognize, that's what the Mishnah Pirkei Avos says, that you should know 3 things, you'll never come to sin. And in short, the punchline is if you know that you're in front of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, it's kind of hard to do averos. So that's what the punchline is that we have the wrong perspective. We think that it's impossibly difficult, and therefore we don't have it. So it's like someone asking for us something tiny, and we don't have it, and therefore it feels it's dome alav kikli gadol. 3/4 of the way down, the Gemara says, Amar Abzera, Haomer Shema Shema Ki Omer Modim Modim Dami. All right, our Mishnah said Modim Modim, that if someone says Modim twice, it was problematic. And our Gemara said above that it's Mechse Kishtei Rishuyos, that it looks like there's 2 deities, and that's problematic. So fine. So, but what Reb Zera does is he extends it that if you say Shema twice, it's problematic as well. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple. Meisi HaKorei Shema v'Kofla. If a person reads the Shema and he doubles it, Harei Ze Meguna. That's disgusting. It's inappropriate. You shouldn't do it. However, says the Gemara, Meguna hu dehave. It is not right, but shtuke lo mashtikin on. But we don't silence him like our Mishnah. So how can Reb Zera make an equation between Modim Modim and Shema Shema? Hare, the Brisa itself doesn't say that. The Brisa only says it's Meguna and that we're not Mashaskin, that we don't silence the person. It says the Gemara, Lokasha, it depends on what the case is. One word at a time, Shema, Shema. And that's just repeating it, B'tanila. And Hadamar Psuka, Psuka, B'tanila. And in one case, we're discussing saying the whole pasuk. Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Shem Echad, and then Shema Yisrael Shem Elokeinu Shem Echad. Those are different cases. Amalei Rapapa leRava v'Dilma meIkara lo kivein daite v'hashta kivein daite. Maybe we should say the difference between the 2 shmas is whether or not he had kavana the first time he didn't have it, so then the second time he did have it. Hold on 1 second, please. So the Gemara says maybe you just didn't have kavanah the first time you said Shema. What's the big deal? We've all been there. Sometimes you say Shema, you got your eyes closed and you start to fall asleep. You don't realize where you are. You have no idea. So that's a problem. So then maybe we just had no kavanah. The Gemara does not like this recommendation. Amar Le, the Gemara says, and this is today's dose of Musar, maybe this month's dose of Musar. The Gemara says 15 lines from the bottom. Chavrusa klape shmaya. You're sitting there learning with one of your friends. No. This is the Eibishter. What is wrong with us? How could we ever stand lifnei hamakom and not have kavana? Ilo mechavein daite. If there's someone who doesn't have a lot of kavana, mechina le be'ar zafta denafcha. I'm going to hit him over the head with a blacksmith's hammer. Ad mechavein daite. What are you doing? How is it possible that we're standing in front of the aron and we're spaced out? I'm guilty. We're all guilty, but that's what the Gemara is framing out. Is it chavrusa klape shmaya? If a person doesn't have the right kavana, so then how can you treat a Kadosh Baruch Hu like a chavrusa? You have to listen and you have to be focused and you have to talk clearly. So that's what the Gemara says. So what did the Mishnah mean when it said that one is mechane be'arayos, that they retranslate psukim into some form of euphemism? So the Gemara says there, Tana Rav Yosef, clone avi v'klonima, we're talking about the covet of one's parents. That's the mistranslation. Ha'omer umizara chalo site in the havir, what does that mean? Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. We're talking about the mistranslated version of the pasuk that a Jewish man has tashma shamita with a non-Jewish woman. We're talking about a child who's born and he's going to be keeping avodah zarah. These things happen all the time. I see this as a mole all the time. The Jewish woman who married a nice Catholic guy, and vice versa, which is even this is the vice versa where you have the Jewish man who's wearing a nice Catholic girl. So these are big problems. See the Pew study for more information. Quite damaging. We're at the next Mishnah, 8 lines from the bottom. The Mishnah reads, Maise Ruvain, Nikra v'lo matargim. When it comes to the story of Ruvain in the Torah, that Ruvain moved a bed, his father's bed, which was not so good, not a good idea. So Nikra should be read, but v'lo matargim, the matargim has to know which psukim not to translate. This is one of the psukim that he should not translate. Maise Tamar. The story about Tamar where she was raped, Nikra Umatargem, we do read it and we translate it. Maisa Egel Rishon, the first part of the story of the Egel Azav, Nikra Umatargem, V'hasheni Nikra V'lo Matargem. The second part, which as we'll see in the Gemara, is the dialogue between Aaron and Moshe. There you do read it, but there's no Targum on that. We don't have the Matargem translated. Birchas Kohanim, Maisa David V'Amnon. When it comes to these two things, so then Nikra and V'lo Matargem, and they are read, but we don't do the Targum. And Ein Maftirin B'Merkava. And the halacha is seemingly that Ein Maftirin B'Merkava, that we don't say Haftorah with the Merkava. Rabbi Yehuda Matir, and he says we are allowed. Tosfos on the page, Dibur Maskal and Maftirin B'Merkava, Rabbi Yehuda Matir, V'Kamal and Rabbi Yehuda, that in fact we do speak about the Merkava. So that's why we have it as a Haftorah. That's what the Gemara says, where Haftorah is in. We'll see this later in the Gemara. The Mishnah continues 4 lines from the bottom, last part of the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Ein Maftirin Behodas Yerushalayim. We don't do the Haftorah of the pasuk of Hodas Yerushalayim. We'll speak about this more in the Gemara. Tana Rabbana. We have a brisa quite similar to our Mishnah, but much more at length. Very easy, very quick. It says the Gemara Yesh Nikrin U'Metargimin. Some psukim are read and translated. The Yesh Nikrin V'lo Metargimin. There are some psukim that are read and not translated. The Yesh Lo Nikrin V'lo Metargimin. And there are times that we don't read anything at all. We skip it. We'll have to see what that means. Says the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom. Elu Nikrin U'Metargimin. What are the psukim that we read and translate? Psukim that we might have otherwise thought that we wouldn't have, because most of the Torah is read and translated. We're only highlighting the ones that we thought we might not have to translate. So it says the Gemara, here's an acronym, Balas Akan Nishbet Siman. We're going to go through all of those letters. I'll call them out as I see them. Maisa Breshis, there's your base. In regards to the Maisa Breshis, Nikro Matargin, you read it and you translate it. Says the Gemara, that should be obvious. Pshita, why would you assume not? Says the Gemara, maybe a person's questions can get heretical when they're trying to figure out the beginnings of the earth. Maybe in the process of discussing the Maisa Breshis, people are going to start asking questions. What's above the heavens? Malamata, what's below the earth before it was created? Malifnim, what is considered inside? Mala Achor, what is considered outside? Tosfos here translates these phrases a little bit. Tosfos says, Ma, Pirush Ma Besof Gevulei Ha'olam, what is at the end of the border of the world? The Mizrach to the east, Ulamara. Inami Mahaya Kodem Sheshesime Breshis Mahaya Achar Sheyichle Ha'olam. What will be after the world was destroyed and what was before? So what's not clear from the Gemara is what exactly the halachic problem is. Is it wrong to probe and to try and figure out exactly what happened? So there's a deal in the Rishonim here and in the Achronim and in the Meforshim about what is considered to be problematic. Yes, of course, we should all have a logical, coherent approach as to how we know that the world was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and that the Torah was given at Har Sinai. That's fundamental information. We all should be able to debate it. But there is a dangerous territory, which the Gemara is referencing here, though not with any clarity. And Tosfos doesn't detail what it is that's usher. And Rashi doesn't speak about it on this side of the page. And he doesn't speak about it. Yeah, so the bottom Rashi, I didn't see this before. Sorry, the last Rashi on Chav Ham and Aleph speaks about this in the following way. Rashi says, Maseches Chagiga, the last Rashi on the page, Amistakel ba'arba dvarim ra'ui lo ki'ilu lo bala olam. Also, the first time in Ratzona Shal Melech sheyazkiru shemo al ashba. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu shouldn't be pulled out from a place of garbage. So there's some questions that are inappropriate. Anyways, we had said that our acronym was Balas, that was Breshis. Here's the Lamed. Maisalot, we know that his daughters, that's the Bechira and the Tzira, that they slept with him, and that's Ammon and Moab. And the story of Maisalot, Shnei Benosav, Nikro, Matargim, we do read it and we're Matargim, says the Gemara. Why would we have assumed not? Pshita. Answers the Gemara, maybe we should have been concerned because Lot was a family member of Avram, and we should therefore have not translated it because it's a Gnai, because Avram didn't have the influence on Lot that he would have liked to have had. Kamash Mulan, that's not a concern. Next, Maisa Tamar, that's the tough of Balas. Says the Gemara, the story of Tamar and Yehuda, where Yehuda thought that she was a Zona. We saw this pasuk in this Gemara quoted earlier in the Masechta. Nikru Matargim. I says the Gemara Pshita, why not? Yehuda was a chashuv rav, so you can't just malign people, drag their names through the mud. So it says the Gemara, Kamash Malan Shavche Hudodi. The concern was that it maybe wasn't kavadik, but the Gemara's response is no. It's a shvach that tzad kamimeni. When Yehuda said that she's right, That was my psil, that was my chosem. She's absolutely right, and I'm the one that's guilty. Maisa Egel, we said balas akan and nishba was the acronym. Here's the ayin for akan. Egel Rishon, the first part of the story, Nikra Matargim, says the Gemara Pshita. Of course, we should read it and translate. No. Maybe we should have been concerned about the Jews. They made a big error. We shouldn't embarrass them. That it's considered a kapara. When people say embarrassing things about you, it's a kapara. Arlen Steinman, when there were signs up about him in Bnei Brak that weren't so positive, he told people, please don't take them down. It makes my Olam Haba still better. That's what he says. Okay, so that's why it's not considered a busha to speak about the ego. What about kalalos ubrachos? This is from the Tochacha. Says the Gemara, those are Nikranu Matargim, those we read and translate. Says the Gemara Pshita, why would I have thought otherwise? Answers the Gemara, I might have thought that maybe the Jews would become unmotivated. It's very depressing. Arur, all the different things that might happen, and all the diseases that might happen, and all the terrible maladies and punishments. It can be very overwhelming. So says the Gemara, Kamash Malan, that the Jews can handle it. The Jews can handle all of them. So what about Azharas Ve'onshin? When the Torah details punishments and they detail the wordings for punishments, Nikranu Matargim, why would we not? Of course we should. Name it Nechush Dilma Asu Lemeba Benyura Kamash Malan. Says the Gemara, maybe we should be concerned that if there's such a focus on the negative, that maybe people will only serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu out of Yira and not out of Ahava. Kamash Malan, that the Jew will learn how to serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu out of Ahava, even when there are a lot of details of the Averas. I don't know that this is our generation. Halavai, we should serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu out of Yira. I don't know about Abba. It's a high level, or at least it's a high level for our generation. Maisa Amnon v'Tamar, the rape that took place, Nikru Matargim. Maisa Avshalom, Nikru Matargim. Pshita, why would we not have read those cases? Maybe because they're related to David, we should have said that therefore we shouldn't say it. It's a busha kamash malan. Next, last short line, Maisa Pilegesh Begiva, Nikra Matargim, the awful story about Pilegesh Begiva, where Pilegesh was killed and her body parts were sent, a whole bad story in Sefer Shoftim, Nikra Matargim. First long line. Pshita, of course we should read it. Maybe we should have had some sensitivity to Shevet Binyamin, Kamash Malan, that we don't. Lastly, our Mishnah had referenced the pasuk and the haftarah of Hoda es Yushalayim es Toavoseha, Nikru Matargim, that we read, and we're Matargim. Says the Gemara Pshita, that's obvious too. Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer did something different when he heard this pasuk. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, halfway down 3 lines into the wide lines, there was someone who was the Chazan, he was reading this, and Amar Lo, Rabbi Eliezer says to him very sharply, before you start talking about all the abominations that took place in Yerushalayim, oh my gosh, that's got to be uncomfortable. Go see what abominable things your mother did. That's what the Gemara says. That's what Rabbi Eliezer would say if someone were to be nikra to read this parsha. So clearly he didn't read it against our Gemara. Badku Acharab and Taka played out. They did a little bit of research. They did the ancestry test and they found out that there was a problem. Matzabo Shemetz Psul. They realized that he was not who he thought he was. Okay. And then the Gemara says all of that is sugya number 1. That's nikrin and matargimit. What about the cases that are nikrin v'lo matargimit? What are the psukim and chumash that we read, but we should not be matargim? Says the Gemara, Ra'avdan Siman. The Ra'avdan will be our mnemonic to remind us what all the cases were. Let's start with Ruvain. Ma'aseh Ruvain nikra v'lo matargim. We read it, but we don't translate. And in fact, it happened that Ma'aseh Reb Chanina ben Gamliel shalach leKabul. He went to this city called Kabul. He was talking about this pasuk where it seemed to imply that there was an inappropriate sexual relationship. Says the Gemara, only translate the second half of the pasuk. And they praised him for that because otherwise one would have totally misunderstood what happened here. The pasuk says that Ruvain slept with the wife of his father. That's not what happened. He moved a bed from Zilpah to his mother. So okay, that's what happened. But the pasuk was very sharp about it. Fine. Says the Gemara, that was the Reish Ruvain. Rabdan, what's the ayin? 2/3, a little bit more, a little bit less than that, a little more than halfway down. My Se'egel Hasheni, The second part of the pasuk is Nikra v'lo matargim. Eze Maisa Egel Hasheni, says the Gemara, Min Vayomer Moshe Ad Vayar Moshe. What is that talking about? So I'll read the pasuk for you. Vayomer Moshe El Aaron Ma Asa Lecha Ha'am Hazeh. What did this nation do to you? Ki Hevei Salav Chata Gedola. They brought something terrible upon you. Vayomer Aaron Al Yicharaf Adonim. Don't be so angry at me, my master. Atoyadatas Am Kivarahu. Everyone is so difficult in this people. Vayomer Li. Asalanu Elokim Asher Yilchu Lefanenu Ki Zeh Moshe Ish Asher Ha'elanu Me'eretz Yisrael Lo Yadanu Meha Yolo. We didn't know what happened. Where was Moshe? Fine. So this is the story that took place. This part of the story is Nikra v'lo matargim. We don't translate it. Tanya, the Brisa writes 2/3 of the way down. Picking up on this last discussion of the Egel Hasheni, and then we'll come back to our mnemonic. That because of the way that Aaron referred to the Egel Azah when he was talking to Moshe, Pakru Haminin, they learned the Minin had a little bit of a leg to stand on. Because Aaron said that I took the gold from all the nose rings and I threw them in the fire. And the Egel came out. What does that mean? He gave a credence to the fact that there was an Egel. There is no Egel. There's a dead animal that's covered in gold. It's not a god, but he referred to it as the Egel, and he gave it a little bit of a name. So we need to be careful in our responses that we don't validate things that we don't need to be validating. Fine. So back to our mnemonic, we did the Reish and the Ayin. The Beis is Birkas Kohanim. When it comes to the pasuk, the psukim of Yirecha Hashem Yishmerecha v'chulei, all three psukim, Nikra v'lo matargim, and we read them but don't do the targum. My timer. Dichsiv b'shum dichsiv Yisa. What does it mean? Yisa Hashem panav elecha. There's no real way to translate that, not in an authentic way. Fine. Next, what's the Daled Ra'av done? We did Ruvain, Egel, and the Birchas Kohanim. Here's David ve'Amnon. Lo Nikra and v'lo matargimin. They're not read, nor are they translated. Hi, Amris, we learned above, Ma'isa Amnon v'tamar Nikra u'matargim. So which one is it? Do we say that it's read or that it's not read? Says the Gemara, Lo Kasha. Dichsiv Amnon ben David. In one case it says Amnon ben David, the other says Dichsiv Amnon Stama. So there's differences between the cases, and that's how we distinguish. Good. 3/4 of the way down. There are a number of phrases in the Torah that, in and of themselves, seemingly are not nice words, and the Kri and the Ksiv are different. Kagon Yishaglena and Yishkavena, both of them referring to Tash Meshamita, but there's a cleaner way to speak. That's always the case. The famous Masechta in Maseches Pesachim, he spoke about this of Lashon Sagi Nahor, Lashon Ma'al Yehud Nakat. So that's an example of this. About Poli, Batichorim, this is referring to one's backside. So that has different languages. We should say Batichorim, that's the right way to read it. Charyonim and Divyonim, this is referring to droppings of birds. So Charyonim is a very negative word, and Divyonim is a less negative word. So we try to speak positively. The nicer way to say that is and this is still not gishmak, but instead of referencing the orifices on the body, the Gemara references that which exits the orifices of the body. Lamacharos, lamotsos is talking about the part of the body where one defecates from. There too, there's a nicer word. No, we don't change the word lemichraos because what's going on in that pasuk? That's being spoken about in reference to avodas kol chavim. You don't have to start being all pleasant in your language. Speak negatively. It's fine. It's avodas kol chavim. We don't have to be positive. Amar Rav Nachman, says the Gemara, a very important idea. Kol leitzanusa asira. Leitzanus is not allowed. Famous pasuk from Tehillim of Moshav leitzim lo yashav bar mileitzanusa de'avodas kol chavim desharia. However, one is allowed to be a leitz when it comes to avodah zarah. Okay. Dichsiv, in regards to the type of avodah zarah, which was kara bal karas nebo, that's what it was called. Dichsiv, the pasuk says about him, karsu karav yachtav lo yachlu milat masav gomer, wasn't able to withhold the need to go to the bathroom, a negative reference. Rabbi Yanai Omer mehacha, different pasuk la'agalos base. On yaguru shekain shomron ki avel alav amov uchmarav alav yagilu al kivodo ki gala mimenu. What does it mean al kivodo ki gala mimenu? Al tikri kivodo al kivedo. The heaviness, the pressure, the need to go to the bathroom is what it was referencing. So we see Leitzanus is okay over there. The Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna bar Manoach mishmei de Rav Acha bre de Rav Ika shari la le bar Yisrael. A Jew is allowed to say, a Jew is allowed to say to a person who worships idols, this is a very shocking line, 5 lines from the bottom of the page, take your avodas kochavim, and you can place it, b'shin tov shalach. You can place it in the shin tov. So this is a reference, Rashi says, is to one's backside. That's what if you look in Rashi there, he speaks about lashon the chashuve shas aru ervas mitzrayim. So a very sharp line. Amar Ravashi, Haiman desane shom ane. Somebody who has rumors about him that are said, even if unverified, the Mefarshim write, but everybody's talking about it, somewhat relevant to some of the modern issues that are going on in our news cycle. So if you have someone about everybody keeps saying terrible things about them, you're allowed to be mavaza them. No problem at all. There's no Isra Lashon Hara. It's mutter. And what's Gimel Shin? So Rashi says it's a reference to Girsa. So it's Bar Girsa, Zona, or a reference to a child who was born from Znus or a man who was involved in Znus. And Shema Sarya, his name is poisoned. His name is disgusting. So if everybody keeps talking negatively about someone and it's nonstop, what's the halachic threshold that needs a discussion? That was a bit of a discussion with the recent what's considered guilt and what's considered innocence and when does Lashon Hara not apply? Big sugyas in halacha. Big sugyas. The parak closes out as Haiman, the shapir shomane. If a person has a very, very good name to them, so tov shemi shem and tov, then shari l'shabucha, you're allowed to praise them. What do you mean you're allowed to praise them? So we know that the poskim write that there's an isser called avak lashon hara. And that is that if you say something very nice about someone, it could lead to someone saying, yeah, you think that person's got their game on, but they really don't. Let me tell you what happened. So that's avak lashon hara. You said something nice. You did, in a vacuum, you didn't do anything wrong. But you have to see how the snowball moves. So here, if someone has this shapir shomane, so then you can speak nicely about them. And when one does that, yanuchu lo brachos al rosho, he will be blessed. Hadran alacha koris Megillah omed yiratzon. We should be zocha to come back to this daf in 7.5 years, in person. Says the new parak b'nei ha'ir. This is a discussion that's used. This came up heavily in the building of Makor. We bought a building. Are we allowed to turn a church into a shul? So some of these sugyas are connected. It says the new parak as follows: B'nei ha'ir, if you have people of a city, shemachru rechova shalir, they sold a non-holy part of the city. That money has to be used for holy things. Lokchen b'damav beis hakneses. You have to buy a shul with that. That money can't go to the regular community pot. It has to be used for a shul. Beis hakneses lokchen teva. If you sell a shul, then you have to buy an aron. Teva lokchen mitpachos. If you sell a teva, you sell an ark, then you have to buy the mantelach for the Sefer Torah. Mitpachos yichus svarim, top of chavav and. If one sells the mantelach, they have to buy svarim, which is a reference Rashi says to Nevi'im and Ksuvim. If you sell svarim, then you have to buy lokchen Torah. You can only buy a Torah with it. All of this is, of course, based on the principle of Malin B'Kodesh Ve'in Moridin, that one is not allowed. Rashi says, the second Rashi on the page, Aval Machru Torah V'chulei, Rashi says, Shemalin B'Kodesh Ve'in Moridin. If you sell something, you can only elevate its Kedusha. So if you buy a church, can you turn it into a shul? That's a big jump. And the reverse is even more complicated. What if you sell a shul? Can you sell it to a church? So we'll discuss that a little bit in the Gemara, but not in full detail. Then the Gemara, after scaling up from Rechava to Beis HaKnesses to Teva to Mitpachos, b'chule b'chule. Now we start at the top and scale down. Second line, end of the first line, Chavav Amud Aleph. Aval imachru Torah, if one sells a Torah, lo yikhu svarim, you can't use that money to buy Nevi'im and Ksubim, because that's Yerida B'Kedusha. And we're Malin B'Kodesh Ve'im Moridin. If svarim, if you sell Tanakh, if you sell Nach, lo yikhu mitapchos, you can't buy the mantelach. Teva, you can't buy an aron with that. Teva, if you sell a teva, lo yikhu beis hakneses, you can't use it to buy a shul. And beis hakneses, lo yikhu esaracho, you can't use the money from a shul to buy a deconsecrated space. V'chein b'mosrein, true with all of the leftovers of each of those areas. So this is always a shaila. If you buy a certain number of bricks and there's leftovers, they have kedusha to them in a beis hakneses. Some degree of kedusha, you can only use them for your shul. So I don't know what the lemaisa is, but it's a real shayla post game. If you have something left over from something that was a holy build, what do you do with all the leftovers? You can give it to another organization, but the bricks don't match. Fine, these are shilas, but what do we do with them? Good. The Gemara says, why is it that if you're selling a park, that you have to only buy a shul with the proceeds? Why? You bought a regular piece of property. Why does the money have to go to the shul? Says the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bar Chanan Rabbi Yochanan Zudiri Rabbi Nacham Bar Yossi Stumta. This is only the opinion of one person, but not everybody holds this way. Because Aval Chachamim, they said, Harachov ain't bo mishum kedusha. There's nothing going on in the Rachov. You want to go buy a square where everybody gathers, the Rova Yehudi. It's not inherent. Again, maybe that is inherently holy. But let's say it's equivalent of a space, a square in the center of a town that's not inherently holy. Why do I have to buy a shul with that? It says the Gemara that this is a machlokas tonight. For Rav Nachman Bar Yosei, my time. Why was Rav Nachman Bar Yosei stumta? Why did he say that even if you buy a deconsecrated area, that you have to use the money for proceeds for that which is from? So says the Gemara, because people go out in the streets. We learned about this. People go out in the streets when they daven, and they bring out the aron. Remember, we discussed this some 20 blot ago. Speaking of which, we have a siyum in Yirtzeh Hashem next week. I think we have 7 blot left, 5 blot left, something like that. We'll discuss. So the Gemara says, what's the reason for a menachem to be so makbid? And the Gemara answers, because sometimes we use the rechava, we use the square in the middle of town for a tiny os and for ma'amodos. Okay, if that's true, v'rabbanon, why were the chachamim saying that there's no holiness? Because ahu ba'akrei ba'alma. Come on, that's a couple times a year. That's not enough of a reason to say that all the proceeds when you buy a random square has to go to build a shul. Lav dafka. Fine. Quarter of the way down. Beis HaKnesses lo teva. If you sell a shul, you have to use the proceeds to buy an ark. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Rav Yonasan lo shanu ela bebeis HaKnesses shel kfarim. This is only true that you can sell a shul if the shul is of the kfarim of the villages. Aval, so important. Beis HaKnesses shel krachin. If you have a shul that's a part of a bigger city, keivan demei alma asule, since it came from everyone. Everybody pays membership dues. Everybody pays into the building fund. So then, lo matzah mezabnele, you're not allowed to sell the shul. You don't own the shul. Let's say the president, Rabbi Zimmerman, is the president of Makor right now. Rabbi Zimmerman owns the shul. He doesn't own the shul. He's achroi for the shul, but we own the shul as a conglomerate. We all give money. There's no kick out on shares at the IPO. There's nothing to talk about. But the Gemara gives this bar, lo matzah mezabnele dehavale derabim. It's not owned by any one person. It's owned by every person. So that's why we can't sell a shul in the krachin. We live in the krachin. If you lived in the randomest place in the world, there's a community I used to service in the OU, one shul, one Orthodox shul. Okay, so you're in a kfar. That shul can be sold. So Amar Ravashi, he says, I'm going to break the rule here. Ravashi says, Hi Bekinishta de Matamachasya, my shul here in Matamachasya in Bavel, Afal Gav de Me'alma Asule. Even though really you're right, this was paid by membership dues. I'm maskim, kevan adaita dedika asu. But since I run this place like a chassidish shtibel, everything goes through me. I decide everything and I fundraise for everything. Ibaina mizavnina love. I'm allowed to sell it. So those are the two models of shows that we have. We have shows that are like our show, where all the members give money, and then we have shows that are run like chassidish shows, where the Rebbe, whoever they are, the whole show's in their name. There's no board. They do everything. They make all the decisions. They pay all the bills. That's their show. So that's the distinction that Rav Ashi's making. If the Rav is the be-all and end-all, and it's not, yes, he may fundraise, but he makes all the decisions. If that's the case, then mizavninale, then you can sell it. Says the Gemara, hang on one second. But almost halfway down. We'll finish in time for Mara for sure. Says the Gemara, Meisvei, Amr Yehuda, Maisa Beis HaKnesses Shel Tursim. There was a Beis HaKnesses of the people from Tursi. Shahai B'Yerushalayim, Shemachruha, the Rabbi Eliezer, they sold it. Ve'asa B'Kol Tzarchav, and they made changes to the building. How can that be? Ve'ahasam Dekrachan Hava. How can you sell that if it's a city shul? We know the Rav Ashi answered that, yeah, he's in charge. But what about this case? It says the Gemara, it was a tiny little shul. It wasn't a big deal. It's only 10 families, 15 families. It wasn't a big shul. The Inu Avdua, he ran the whole thing. That's it. That was fine. No problem at all. Next, Meisvei, we have a halacha by by Negoim. But by the base eretz achuzaschem etame b'negoim. Only your achuza, your own home, can be metame b'negoim. Ve'en Yerushalayim metame b'negoim. But in the state of Yerushalayim, there's no such thing as chumas negoim. Rabbi Yehuda, ani lo shamati ala makom mikdash bilvad. I only know about the makom mikdash that that's the case, that there's no chance for negoim to affect Yerushalayim. Ha bate knesios bate midrashos metamen. But when it comes to bate midrashos and bate knesios, they can become tamei. So then there's a subtlety that we need to know here. You can't have negoim unless there's private ownership. Something that belongs to the public can't become tamei b'tumas negoim, which means that a shul can be privately owned, which means that it can be sold. Amai, why is it that it would be able to be sold? It belongs to the public. You made a diuk in the pasuk that it's privately owned. So the shul is a publicly owned shul. Says the Gemara, Ema, you're right. Rabbi Yehuda's comment about the mikdash was wrong. It was really a little different. Rabbi Yehuda, Anilo Shamati ala makom mikudash bilvad. Only a sanctified place, not the makom mikdash bilvad, but a makom mikudash. What is the machlokas between these two approaches? Says the Gemara, Tanakama Savar Lo Nischalka Yerushalayim Shvatim. So there's a big machlokas. Do we say that Yerushalayim was split amongst the Shvatim? We know famously that it's split between Yehuda and Binyamin, and we'll see the details of that right now. But one Shita held that there was no split of Yerushalayim. No Shvatim had a Shlita over Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, I don't agree. He held Nischalka Yerushalayim Shvatim. This machlokas is reflected. This machlokas over here is reflected in the following brisa. The Tanya, the brisa writes, "Mahaya bechelkol shel Yehuda." Which parts of Yerushalayim belong to Yehuda? So the Gemara is extremely clear. Harabayis, halishkos v'ha'azaros. Harabayis at large, halishkos, the smaller rooms, v'ha'azaros, and the azaros, the Ezras Nashim, Ezras Yisrael, and Ezras Leviah. Fine. What did Binyamin have? It says the Gemara, he had the ulam, the heichal, he had the antechamber and the heichal where all the magic took place. Ubeis kodesh hakodashim, and the kodesh hakodashim, the deepest part of that room. Uritzua haisa yotzes, there was a strip of land. This is like sometimes you see, if you look very closely at a border, you'll see these like jutting lines. The border comes down and juts out and comes back in. Says the Gemara, Ritzua haisa yotes bechelko shel Yehuda, v'nichneses bechelko shel Binyamin, uba mizbeach banui. The mizbeach itself was not in Shevet Binyamin. Afal pi that the rest of the property was. There was a little property line that was drawn in the previous districting meeting, and Yehuda got the mizbeach. Huge deal. By Binyamin atzadik nitztar le b'chol yom levola. He would have loved to have absorbed that in his property. He would have loved to have it. He was a tzaddik, so he didn't fight about it. He was there samakom. And that's what the pasuk means. I'm always hovering over it. I'm always thinking about it. I wish the mizbeach was in my shevet. Because of that passion, just the passion alone, just from the passion, Zacha Binyamin v'naseh ushpizcha l'shchina. He became the one who was zocha to hold the shechina. Where was the shechina kept? By the aron with the which was kept in the kodesh hakodashim, and that's where it was. It was in his property in Binyamin. That's why he was zocha. So all of that is Rabbi Yehuda. But what about the Tanakama, who says that there was no such thing as shvatim that controlled Yerushalayim? Says the Gemara, the high Tana, the Tanakama was of the opinion there was no such thing. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, Ein maskirin batim Yerushalayim. You're not even allowed to rent houses in Yerushalayim. The Airbnb network shut down. We don't own it. It's not Yehuda's. It's not Binyamin's. It's nobody's. You can't rent it. It's not yours. You can't rent something that you don't own. You're not allowed. That says the Gemara. Rabbi Lazar bar Tzadok Omer Af lo mitos. You can't even rent a bedroom. Nothing. It's not yours. Lefichach. Therefore, Oros Kachim. When it came to the skins of Kachim, Bale Ushpizin Notlin Osan Bizroa. That if someone were to sleep in their house, you can't give money, but if they had skins from a korban, then the host would take it. Rabbi Ishmamina or Achara the Mishpak Inish Gulfa Umashcha Beushpize. That when one goes to someone's house, they should leave over pitchers and hides, which was, I guess, the housewarming gifts of the day. That would be appropriate. We're going to stop right here at Amar Rava. We'll pick up in Mirta Shema on Shabbos. If I'm not improved by Shabbos, then we'll probably do a recording Motzei Shabbos, and we'll figure it out. I'll let you know, and we'll stop right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night. Take care.